Welcome to the very first episode of my new podcast, The Kevin Rooke Show. I'll be covering all sorts of tech and investing topics. I'll be bringing on interesting guests. But before any of that, I want to step back and set the stage here, talk a little bit about why I'm starting a podcast now. For those of you following me on Twitter, you'll know I'm a big fan of the Lightning Network. I've been studying it and doing a lot of research, trying to figure out what are some of the interesting use cases that the Lightning Network enables. And one of the use cases I kept coming back to was podcasting. So I downloaded a podcasting app that is Lightning enabled. The one I use is called Fountain. It's on the App Store. It's on Google Play. And what Fountain does is it basically allows any listener to fund a creator. You can tip them. You can send messages to them. You can stream sats to them over the Lightning Network. And it kind of changes a bit of the business model of podcasting. It changes the experience. It makes it more engaging. It makes it a direct connection between listeners and their podcast creators. So I wanted to experience that from the perspective of a creator now. So this show is going to be available on all the major podcasting applications. You can listen to it on Apple, you can listen to it on Spotify if you want, but you can also listen to it on Fountain. And on Fountain, that's where you're going to be able to experience this full podcasting 2.0 Lightning enabled experience where you'll be able to send a tip or send a message and directly engage with me as I create more episodes. I figured the best way to start this podcast series off was to bring on the co-founder of Fountain, Oscar Merry, for the very first episode. He's going to talk a lot about how Fountain works and exactly why he's building it. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show and look forward to testing out this new podcasting 2.0 experience.
Hey, Oscar. Thanks for joining me today on the very first episode of the Kevin Rooke Show. Why don't you start by telling listeners a little bit about your background, what you're building with Fountain, and why it's important?
Hey, Kevin. Yeah, great to be on. Really excited for the conversation. So, my name's Oscar Merry, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fountain. And Fountain fundamentally is a podcast app. So you get everything that you'd expect from a podcast app in terms of an amazing listening experience. If you're coming from Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Overcast or whichever your favorite podcast app, you should have everything that you'd expect. But then we have two core differentiators with what we're trying to do at Fountain. Number one, you as a listener can create and share clips from the podcast you're listening to. And we think that there's so much more that can be done with discovery and sharing of podcast content, and happy to dive into that and talk about it in more detail. The second thing that differentiates Fountain from your typical podcast app is you as the listener have the ability to stream and tip Bitcoin to the podcaster over the Lightning Network directly as you're listening. And again, happy to dive more into that because there's a lot of it really exciting features and things that we can do now that we have the Lightning Network, and we can use it to kind of unify what up until this point has been a fragmented ecosystem in podcasting.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to dive into both those. Let's start with discoverability first, and then we can move into Lightning Network stuff in a bit. But tell me more about what is fundamentally broken, I guess, about discoverability and why and what Fountain is doing to kind of fix that.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of core problems that exist with podcasting as it exists today around discovery and also sharing. So I think one kind of example that most people who listen to podcasts have probably encountered is when you're listening to a podcast episode, it's an incredible episode that you've got so much value out of, and then you want to go and share that with, a friend or a colleague or family, whoever it might be. And the difficulty in sharing that podcast episode is fundamentally it's so long. So you're asking that person to take a considerable amount of time out of their day to go and listen to this thing that you recommended. And it's fundamentally just a big ask. An hour plus of someone's precious time in their day is a lot to ask, when actually all you're trying to do with that recommendation is normally share a particular idea or a particular insight, a particular nugget of wisdom with that person. And so with Fountain, we give you the ability to create a clip from the podcast you're listening to. We use the transcript of the podcast episode to make it much easier to actually create that clip and produce something that's contextually easy to consume. And so instead of sharing that full hour and a half episode, you can just share the clip, and you can either do that within the Fountain app, or all the clips are exportable as videos, so you can share them on social media, as a DM in your favorite messaging app, or in any other way that you want. And so we really, with the clipping, just want to make it easier to discover and share these kind of insights that exist within podcasts without having to go and listen to the full episode. On top of that, separate to kind of like sharing content from podcast episodes with other people, there's also the back catalogue of every single podcast show that normally just sits there in a kind of dormant state and is never, it's difficult to go and dig into it. So imagine your favorite show and think about when you first discovered it and what episode number that was. You probably never went back into the back catalogue because it's just, again, too time consuming to go through and figure out, where's the insight, where's the interesting content. And so over time, we want to also make the back catalogue of podcasts more easy to go back through, sample through the clips that have been created, and really give you as a listener the ability to, just explore podcast content in a new way.
And these clips, they can be created by listeners too, right? These can be like a listener can come in and create a clip of this show if they found something interesting, and then they can share it, right? So it kind of, there's a bit of a more of a social element to that where it's not just the creator, right?
Yeah, exactly. So one thing you have probably seen on social media is podcast creators themselves sharing highlights from new episodes in order to promote the podcast. And that's great. That's amazing. So we're basically giving the listener the same ability to create and share their favorite moment in the podcast, because the host's favorite moment might be different from the listener's favorite moment. And there might be multiple moments or again, pieces of insight that work on their own as like individual contextual pieces of information. We're trying to give the listener the ability to do that in a really easy way.
Very cool. So let's move from discoverability to payments. And maybe a spot to start with this is podcasting 2.0. This is a term I've kind of heard people talk about quite a bit. I don't really know what the correct definition is, but maybe you can start with like, what is this new era of podcasting? Why does it matter? And how are payments involved in its process?
Yeah, definitely. So podcasting 2.0 is a movement led by Adam Curry and Dave Jones. And their mission with podcasting 2.0 is to preserve the open nature of podcasting. And this really is important because you can see the incumbent players in podcasting starting to centralize things and move away from open RSS and the features that have made podcasting great so far. And so that's the mission of podcasting 2.0. And it's wider than just the lightning payments, but a big part of podcasting 2.0, and the thing that is getting us and many others very excited is the open standard within RSS to include Bitcoin Lightning payments into podcasts. And this is what we're using to power the Lightning payments and tipping and messages within Fountain.
Okay, very cool. So the centralization of some of these apps that you were talking about, like I guess you're referring to like Joe Rogan's exclusive deal where that is now under a single company, and that company now controls the podcasting experience. So podcasting 2.0 is kind of a push towards more decentralization in that aspect.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that's exactly right. Spotify in particular are pushing hard to bring on exclusive podcasts to kind of draw people into their ecosystem. And with Spotify in particular, the way their technology works is it's not necessarily based on RSS. So, for example, you see when Spotify introduce new features to their app, it's not built on the open standard. And this is why I think podcasting over the past 10 years has lagged behind, let's say, online video or other social media in terms of the type of features that we see. So, for example, a lot of podcasts will put their podcast on YouTube so that they get things like the YouTube comment system, which is great. People love that. But this hasn't really been possible with podcasting because of the fragmented nature of RSS. So you have multiple different hosting providers and you have multiple different apps. And to create some kind of unified comment system between all of them is just really difficult. So yeah, podcasting is traditionally lagged behind. But the great thing about the Lightning Network is it suddenly gives us a way to build these kind of engagement features that can sit across the different hosting providers and across the different apps.
I see. So if I'm understanding here correctly, I think what you're kind of saying is like some of the incumbents like Spotify, Apple are trying to kind of put the Web 2 playbook on podcasts and kind of like centralize it, put it under their power, and get to the point where they can like integrate some of these features that bring podcasting to parity on their own. And you guys are saying, no, we can do this on the Lightning Network. We can bring these same features into podcasting, but do it in an open standard. Is that kind of the gist of it?
Exactly. Yeah. Spotify, I think their, unstated goal is to become the YouTube of podcasting. And they're going to try and build all of the features that you see on YouTube for podcasting, but do it so that it only exists within the Spotify ecosystem. What podcasting 2.0 and what we are also trying to do is produce those same incredible features that listeners want, but do it in a way where it's open so that people using different hosting providers or different apps can still participate in those great new features.
Right. And so right now, I think the two main features that you guys have, if I'm not mistaken, are you guys have the chat feature. You can send a message to a podcaster, right? Someone listening to this on Fountain could send a message they could tip in sats as well. And they can also stream payments, right? Per minute listened. Those are the kind of core, I think, Lightning features you guys have right now. Why is Lightning the important solution here? Like, why'd you pick Bitcoin? Why not some other kind of either a fiat system or some other kind of altcoin?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the two features. So your listeners right now, if they're listening on Fountain, hopefully, or another podcasting 2.0 enabled app, but on Fountain, you would be able to right now set the per minute Satoshi value that you would like to stream. And this is all optional. It's the value for value model where, the content is not behind a paywall, but instead, if you find the content valuable, you let the podcaster know that by streaming them sats. And so, yeah, you can set in Fountain the per minute sat value that you want to stream every minute. And then also, if there's a particular point in the episode that you really get great value from, or you just want to interact with the podcaster, you can send a boost, which is kind of like a tip. It's a higher amount. Again, you can set it to be whatever you want, and you can include a message along with that. And so what's really interesting about this is the benefit to the podcaster is not just the financial benefit, but it also creates this connection between the host and the listener that didn't exist previously. Because as a listener, I'm able to, when I hear something really interesting, I know that I can instantly communicate with the host. And I know that the host is going to take particular attention to my message because it comes with a payment. So that's really beneficial to the listener to feel like they can reach out and participate and engage with the host. And then on the host sides as well, not only do they get paid, but they get listener engagement, they get feedback, they get the timestamp of the message and the payment as well, which is helpful for analytics. And then also, they can also use these messages as content. So we see a lot of podcasters, setting up a segment in there, whether it's a weekly show, to kind of, go through all of the boost messages and talk about them, answer questions, thank their listeners. And so it's a great way just to build a bit of an engagement and a bit of community between the podcaster and the listener. In terms of why Bitcoin and why Lightning, I mean, fundamentally, the way we see the Lightning Network is it just delivers on the promise of Bitcoin, which is programmable money, and it's incredibly flexible. There's no real limit on the lower bounds of how much you can stream or send, which is really beneficial if you're just getting started. And yeah, it just delivers on the promise of programmable money, which is amazing.
Yeah. One other thing you kind of alluded to in the discussion about chatting and sending payments through is that you said you could send it from other podcasting 2.0 apps as well. And so that's something I think that's unique for a lot of people. Like, we're so used to, if I post a tweet, you can comment, but only if you're commenting through Twitter. You can't comment through Facebook on my tweet, right? I'm not going to see it. But if you're now hosting a podcast, you can have streams of comments coming in from multiple podcasting 2.0 apps, and the producer can see them all and kind of engage with them all, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the beauty of this system, is that it's open. So you'll be able to see, Oscar commented at minute 35 from Fountain with this message. And then you'll also be able to see the messages from people using other apps. And that's great, because at the end of the day, that's competition for the podcasting ecosystem, as opposed to once you get to a certain scale with traditional social media, it's basically impossible to have any competition. I mean, if you look at YouTube, there's a great example there. And this way it gives the end listener the choice. They can choose what app they prefer, and everyone has different preferences. But importantly, for the engagement and for the podcaster, those messages all come in over the Lightning Network. So all the information's there.
Do you think this changes the competition structure for podcasting apps? Like, because everything's open, and anyone can kind of tap into Lightning and this kind of podcasting 2.0, do you think that is going to change the way businesses like yours and others kind of compete with each other? Because you can no longer rely on centralizing data and kind of using that as a moat, because all the data, the podcasts are RSS feeds, and the payments are on an open standard, and all that's kind of open. So how do you think about how that changes like the competitive landscape of Fountain and the kind of podcasting ecosystem?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think, fundamentally, it makes it more competitive. So it means that we as Fountain need to do a better job in providing an amazing listening experience and an amazing app. And at the end of the day, that's good for the consumer. So it is harder for us. It's going to be more competitive because, yeah, as you say, the barrier to entry is lower. But that's good for the end consumer, and we're ready for that competition. Another interesting point, though, is the companies and the apps that integrate with podcasting 2.0 and join that movement. We can actually, although we're competing with each other, we can also kind of join together to compete against the incumbents. So it's this kind of weird situation where we're competing against each other, but we're also working together to develop podcasting 2.0 and the kind of features that we have to try and convince people to switch from Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Google Podcasts to one of our apps. And so we join together to get people to switch from the incumbents, but then once they've made that choice to switch, we're competing against each other.
Do you think we'll ever see Apple or Spotify integrate some of these podcasting 2.0 features, or is that kind of like going against their business model?
Yeah, I think it does go against their business model. So I would be surprised to see them integrate these features. You never know, but I just feel like, especially with Spotify, the money that they've spent on exclusive shows, hundreds of millions of dollars, it kind of defeats the point of doing that. So I would be very surprised to see them integrate these features. And that is where we have an amazing advantage against the incumbents.
Right. I want to talk about the sats that are being streamed right now on Fountain. Have you kind of seen any of the messages that people are sending right now? What are they saying? What's the kind of the general theme of, I'm listening to a podcast and I want to send a message. What are those messages like? And are they coming with payments? What's that experience been like so far for Fountain?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing is you can't send a message without a payment. So that's like really important to understand. And it's actually great because it increases the positivity of the messages that get sent, because if you want to troll someone or criticize someone, it's harder because you have to actually pay to do that. So I think that's a great aspect of it. But in terms of the type of messages, I mean, they really do vary. For me personally, the type of messages that I like sending, I guess there's like three categories for me. One is just saying thank you. So I'll get to the end of an episode and I'll just thank the host and say that was, really informative, really impactful for me. Thanks for, producing this. And obviously I'll send a payment with that. Another type of message is a question. So maybe at one point in the episode, you feel like the topic wasn't addressed as much as it could have been. So you can ask a clarifying question, or you can say, hey, please, next episode, can you address this particular point? And that's, as I said previously, that's great for podcasters, because not only does it let the listener base know that if you ask a question, it will be received and it will be actioned upon, but it will actually give you content for the next episode as part of the show. So yeah, questions are a big one. And then I think the other ones are just, quite funny comments on the show, which are just, probably don't fit into a category, but yeah, they're just quite funny, really. We've seen some hilarious ones come through.
That's awesome. So streaming stats, so when you're sending a message, you have to send some payment, but what is the minimum kind of payment there? Because we're on Lightning, we can do very, very small payments. Is it one sat? Is that the minimum right now on Fountain?
Yeah, so right now, the minimum is 100 sats for a streaming payment. And the reason for that is a lot of podcasters will set up through the podcast index service called Podcaster Wallet, and they take a 1% split fee for doing that. So a really important concept to get across is the concept of splits. So you as a podcaster can not just put your own Lightning address in your RSS feed, but you can put different splits. So let's say you have a producer or an editor, you could give them 10% of all of the sats to their Lightning node. And you can really get creative with this and put whoever you want in the splits. So because Podcast Index take a 1% fee, and that's why we kind of like limit it to 100 sats, but you can set a lower per minute sat value. So I will sometimes set 50 sats per minute. That's like my kind of go-to. And what we do there is we just batch the payments. So we'll just wait until you get 100 sats, and then we'll just send off the streaming payment. One thing also to note is we have just launched support for episode level splits. So what this means is you as a podcaster can change the split destinations for different episodes. So let's say you have a standard one for your show where you take 90% and you give 10% to an editor or producer. But then let's say for a specific episode, you have a guest that you would like to split the payments with. You can add the guest in, and so you can give the guest 25%. Or if the episode is about a particular cause or something where you're almost asking your listeners to help support that isn't funding you directly, you can change that for that one episode. So you might say, okay, for this episode, guys, we're going to give 100% of all of the sats sent to this cause. Like, hit the boost button now and like support this cause. So that's what's really great about this. We have full flexibility and creativity, and it really just lets you get creative with what you're doing financially with your podcast.
That's very cool. So I could make a split with you on this episode and say, you're a guest, you're going to get X percent of all the sats that come in, and it's just going to go to you, right? I'm not a middleman here. There's no one's getting in the way, and there's no fee on that either. Just half of it goes to you, half of it goes to me, or whatever the split is. And then if I make another episode and another episode, another episode, and someone comes back to watch our episode, they can send the payment and it still goes half to you, half to me, even though the split may have been different on other episodes, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the splits will just stay there in the RSS feed and always exist. So if somebody comes along a year later, 2 years later, and listens to that episode, the Lightning payments will still go to those split addresses.
That's very cool. What do you think this idea of streaming sats is going to do to the business model of a podcaster? Is this going to augment ad revenue? Is this going to kind of make the flat subscription fee model obsolete? What's your thoughts on how streaming sats changes the business model for an actual podcaster?
Yeah, definitely. So I think in the short term, the best way to see it and the realistic way to see it is this is going to augment your existing advertising revenue or your sponsorship revenue. I think you need to be, realistic about how many people are going to have the ability to, send you sats over the Lightning Network. That's a big challenge for us right now is, for people that know about Bitcoin, they know about Lightning, it's easy for them to onboard. But for somebody that doesn't care about Bitcoin or Lightning and they just want to support you as the podcaster, it's more challenging for them. Once we address that, things will be much easier. So I think in the short term, realistically, this is going to augment your advertising revenue. But I think in the long term, the opportunity to earn significantly more through streaming sats and boosts will really be real, because at the end of the day, rather than, let's say you're a podcaster and you have a Patreon, for example, which we see a lot of podcasters have, instead of every single one of your listeners, or let's say a small percentage, paying you a small amount every month to support you on Patreon, instead of that, you get the ability to send a custom amount on every episode, which means that some episodes people won't send you anything, but some episodes people will really receive so much value from that episode that they'll tip you a large amount. And we have seen some significant payments come through Fountain. So we've had payments over $100. So I think
Wow.
in the long term, yeah, you as a podcaster will be able to earn significantly more than you would do from an advertising budget or a sponsorship. But I think it's going to take time for that to come into play. I think one thing on subscriptions for podcasts, I mean, my personal view is that if you put your podcast content behind a paywall, you're inherently limiting the growth potential of your audience. Because what you're saying to the world is the best content is you have to pay to get it. So how do people, sample? How do people discover the best content that you have? It's much more difficult for them to do that. I think it still will work for some podcast formats, but yeah, personally, I think it's better to put your content out there and use the value for value model to let your listeners pay you what they think it's worth. And over the long term, once people get more familiar with Lightning, once the onboarding gets easier, and once the engagement features that come along with the payments get developed further, then I think that will be really significant.
Right. What are you learning right now about Lightning Network UX and onboarding people to the Lightning Network? Like, how much of a struggle is it to get someone who's not maybe familiar with Lightning to get their first sats and get on board? What are some of the learnings and what are the pain points, I guess, right now?
Yeah, so it is a struggle right now. And where we want to get, I guess to start, where we want to get to is a brand new listener should be able to onboard to the Lightning Network and send their first sats to a podcaster without even knowing what Lightning is, what Bitcoin is, what a Lightning invoice is. That's where we want to get to. It's almost they're using it without knowing they're using it. Right now, it's a struggle though, because really it's the fiat on-ramp to Lightning that is the difficult part. So how do you purchase your first Bitcoin on Lightning as someone that's never come across it before? And this differs in different countries around the world, different jurisdictions because of the regulations. So that definitely is a challenge. I think we've got some plans for how we can make that easier for people. But I think what we've got going for us is that this is a problem that is not just going to exist in podcasting. This is going to exist for every digital product because eventually everything's going to use the Lightning Network, and people are going to need these on-ramps that work in a more frictionless way than they currently do.
That's interesting that everyone you think is going to be using the Lightning Network. How far beyond podcasting do you think this can go? What are some of those business models that you think make sense for Lightning payments?
Yeah, so I think there's so many, and I really do think that it will, every digital product that you use, every digital product that you pay for will use the Lightning Network. A great example that I had today was a paywall for the Wall Street Journal. I don't pay for the Wall Street Journal, but I often see articles linked on Twitter that I really want to read. And I'm just not going to go and sign up for the paywall, but I would happily pay, whatever that article is worth in sats over the Lightning Network just to unlock that one article. So I think that's a great example. Yeah.
Interesting. In the last month, we've had El Salvador announce that they're making Bitcoin legal tender. We've had Twitter announce that they released a tipping feature allowing anyone to kind of tip creators on Twitter. Both of those are using the Lightning Network under the hood. What have you seen any impact on Fountain's business with these two announcements? These seem to be like catalysts in the industry at large. We've seen like adoption of the Lightning Network kind of growing from a capacity standpoint. Have you guys seen kind of an inflow of users or like additional interest from people maybe funding their wallets since those announcements?
I think where it really helps is with podcasters. So, we are speaking to podcasters that, again, aren't necessarily familiar with Bitcoin, don't know much about it. And really, the pitch to them to start, to set up their Lightning wallet and put it in their RSS feed, the pitch to them is not about Bitcoin or Lightning. It's about, hey, like this is a much better way for your listeners to show their support and to engage with you and to interact with you. And so often the Bitcoin and Lightning aspect is almost it kind of puts them off. So I think Twitter integrating Lightning, El Salvador, all of these developments really help with that, because it kind of sends a signal that this is an inevitable thing that's going to happen. I mean, we all believe that, but I think once your average person out there that hasn't come across it before sees these kind of stories in the news, it really gets that inevitability across to them. So yeah, it definitely helps.
Awesome. So I think a lot of people listening to the show are relatively new to the Lightning Network. I would say I'm relatively new. I've kind of been studying it for 3 or 4 months, but in a broader scope, I'm still relatively new. Are there any kind of apps or tools that you are a fan of or you're trying out in the Lightning Network space outside of podcasting?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, just to let the people listening know which wallet I use. So I currently use Blue Wallet as my kind of like my preferred Lightning wallet, and it's what I will use to top up my sats on Fountain. So yeah, definitely, if you're new to the Lightning Network or new to Bitcoin and you want to, experience a great wallet, definitely check out Blue Wallet. Other than that, I think a great example of the Lightning Network that I've seen is a website called Stacker News. It's stacker.news, and it's kind of like a Hacker News type site where you can kind of rank articles, but it also has Lightning tipping built into it, so you can kind of like tip the favorite articles that you've seen on there in Lightning. So that's a great example. I'd say those two are good for people to go and check out.
Is Blue Wallet a custodial wallet? Is it non-custodial? I know a lot of Bitcoiners are really aware of like whether they're holding funds in the custody of someone else or holding their own funds. Do you think that's going to be a similar issue on Lightning, or are these amounts typically small enough that it's not a huge issue for people? I'm curious to know your thoughts on like that custodial versus non-custodial setup.
Yeah, so my personal view is that I think both will exist in the future, and the important thing is that you just have the choice to use either a custodial or a non-custodial option. I believe Blue Wallet offers both the custodial and non-custodial. So I just use it as a custodial wallet for small amounts on the Lightning Network. But I believe you can also connect to your own node running in your home and use it in that way as well. So yeah, I think the most important thing is that we have choice.
Right. Okay. So for newcomers that want to get involved with the Lightning Network, they want to try out Fountain, this could be either as a listener or as a podcast producer. What are the steps involved here? Maybe we can kind of split the two up. For a listener, how do you get involved? How do you fund a podcast? Someone could send a couple sats to this show if they want.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this show right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, pause the show after you've listened to what I'm about to say. Pause the show, download Fountain. You can go to fountain.fm and you'll be able to import your existing podcast from Apple or Spotify. And then you can create a wallet on Fountain. It's easy to do. It's one click, and it is a custodial wallet. At this point, we're going to add the option for non-custodial. But yeah, download Fountain, create your wallet. And then, as I said, I use Blue Wallet. So you can download Blue Wallet. And within Blue Wallet, you can actually buy Bitcoin on the Lightning Network in a couple of clicks. So that makes it really easy for someone that doesn't own Bitcoin, doesn't have any Bitcoin on the Lightning Network to get started. Once you've bought some Bitcoin in Blue Wallet, you can just transfer that into Fountain, and then you're ready to go to start streaming sats to this podcast. So yeah, I would love it if everyone could pause now, go do that. And also, send Kevin a message with the boost, letting him and me know, what was difficult, what was easy, because we definitely are working on ways to make that onboarding easier. So yeah, that's if you're a listener. And then if you're a podcaster, the first thing to do would be to go to podcasterwallet.com and register your RSS feed with the podcast index. And then from there, you'll be able to add your Lightning address into your RSS feed. And that means anyone can start streaming you sats. If you're a podcaster and you want to talk through, in more detail how to do that, feel free to just send me an email. My email is oscar@fountain.fm, and we can definitely help you get started and also, help you craft like a good message for your listeners in terms of like how they can start doing this as well. So yeah, hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the one thing that people are going to realize as soon as they do this is this all happens instantly, right? That there's like everything settles instantly on Lightning. So for the podcast creator who's receiving funds, they're instantly in their custody or the custody of whichever wallet they're using. And for the listener, they can onboard from either fiat or Bitcoin. I've actually noticed a lot of wallets are starting to enable, make it so that anyone can fund with Bitcoin and can automatically turn it into Lightning, kind of behind the scenes. I think Moon Wallet does that as well, where you could send on-chain Bitcoin and then try and make a Lightning payment, even though you didn't have Lightning, and they will, on the back end, make a transfer and turn it into Lightning Bitcoin, which is really cool. But okay, let's kind of wrap this up. And why don't you tell people where they can find more about you and more about Fountain?
Yeah, for sure. So you can download Fountain now on iOS and Android. Just go to fountain.fm and you'll see the download links there. In terms of getting in contact with us, you can email us you can email me at oscar@fountain.fm, or you can find us on Twitter at fountain_app, and I'm on Twitter at Mary Oscar. So yeah, please do, especially if you're a podcaster and you're interested in learning more or getting your podcast set up to receive sats, please do email me, and yeah, happy to chat more about it. And the last thing I'll say is if you're listening on Fountain and you notice anything about the listening experience that you'd like to see improved, please get in touch as well. We're always looking for feedback on the app.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. I'm really excited to test out Fountain as a creator. I've been using it for a while as a listener, which is kind of fun, but I'm excited to see the other side of this. So thanks for being the first guest, and I hope we can do this sometime soon.
No worries, Kevin. Yeah, great to chat. And for the next episode, excited to see what boost messages come through for this one. So yeah, I'll be listening.
Yeah, for sure. Have a good one.